Debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, and if I could be so bold to state, I think I know what some might be thinking in the chamber about my private member's motion that would create a special committee to develop a national plan to end and prevent homelessness. I think some are thinking, oh no, not another committee. And to that I would say, but this special committee and its mandate is different. And Madam Speaker, I can imagine the response to that might be, but that is what they all say. This time it's going to be different. Madam Speaker, let me lay out the case to show why it is different. My case for my motion, my private member's motion to create a national plan to end and prevent homelessness. It's not just another committee to engage in busy work, but instead an opportunity for parliamentarians from all political parties to roll up our sleeves, to work in partnership with government and communities to create the roadmap to end homelessness, not to manage it, not to reduce it, but to end it. And if that weren't enough to contend with, all our biases against committees, I'm speaking on homelessness immediately on the heels of the government's important announcement of the National Housing Strategy. And I know how it is hard to see the newsworthiness of a plan. But, Madam Speaker, a national plan to end and prevent homelessness is the critical next step to the strategies, targets, and principles of the National Housing Strategy. Prior to this first hour of debate on my motion, I reached out to fellow parliamentarians and met one-on-one with many of my colleagues, both in opposition and from the government side. And I found more agreement and commonality than disagreement and partisanship. I didn't hear any disagreement that we're in a crisis. We all know the numbers. 1.7 million Canadians in core housing need, according to the recent data from CMHC. Or put another way, 1.7 million Canadians are paying more than 1/3 of their income. 400,000 of that 1.7 million are paying more than 50% of their income on housing that is either substandard, not in good repair, even unsafe, or doesn't meet their needs. For many Canadians, that means living in overcrowded homes or apartments. No one I spoke to was denying the unacceptability we find ourselves in when it comes to housing and homelessness in this country. And further, I didn't meet a parliamentarian that thought the emergency response to the crisis made any sense, whether it be the toll on people's lives or the wasted resources and the escalation of high-cost emergency services like emergency room visits, ambulance, and police calls. Many of the parliamentarians I spoke to were well aware of the statistics, the annual costs of institutional responses, like hospitals and jails, which is $66,000 to $120,000 per annum per person, or emergency shelter costs, with the cost of $13,000 to $42,000 per person per year, versus the cost of affordable housing of $5,000 to $8,000 per year per person, or $13,000 to $18,000 a year for supportive or transitional housing. These statistics, of course, don't take into account the human and social costs. I found parliamentarians were on the same page, that homelessness is cheaper to fix than to ignore. Madam Speaker, it was a pleasure to sit and speak with the MP from Medicine Hat, Karsten Warner, who sat on the Medicine Hats committee that led to their plan to end homelessness. And of course, Medicine Hat was the first city in Canada to end homelessness. In 2014, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador announced its plan to end homelessness. It set goals and benchmarks that made sense to its community. In 2015, the City of Guelph, Ontario announced its plan to end homelessness, and there are many, many more. MPs from all political stripes represent communities who have tackled and transformed our response to homelessness from the ground up. And those responses have achieved astounding results. Communities like Hamilton, Lethbridge, Calgary, to name a few. These communities created plans, brought people around a common table, rolled up their sleeves and said, We can do this. We can end homelessness in our community. And Madam Speaker, I've had my own experience of the power of a plan to transform a community's response or lack of response to homelessness. As the CEO of the United Way, I was part of a leadership team of business people, labour groups, city officials, Indigenous government leaders, and folks with a lived experience of homelessness that drafted our community's first plan to end homelessness. In 2006-2007 in Saskatoon, we experienced an economic boom, like many communities in Alberta. With the economic boom came skyrocketing housing prices. This saw people with full-time jobs, full-time good-paying jobs in Saskatoon, unable to afford rent and living in emergency shelters. We had students living in cars because of the high cost of housing so they could afford their school tuition. This new reality of homelessness galvanized our community. From CEOs to labour leaders to our then police chief, we could no longer turn a blind eye or hope that someone would do something. That's when we turned to our neighbours in Alberta and learned about the remarkable work that cities, community organizations, and 2 provincial governments were doing with plans to end homelessness, and it was a game changer for us. And where our provincial government feared to tread, we, on the other hand, rolled up our sleeves and invested in housing homeless people based on the Housing First model, a pillar of plans to end homelessness in Alberta. The program was called Journey Home. In its first year, people helped by Journey Home saw an 82% drop in the use of high-cost emergency services like ambulance, police responses, emergency room visits, and hospitalization. The return on investment was for every dollar invested, $2 was saved. One participant in the program had been homeless for 17 years. The average length of homelessness for participants was 3 to 5 years. One person said, "Housing first saved my life." Madam Speaker, results like we've seen in Saskatoon are occurring in cities and communities across the country, from small cities to large urban centres. The players around the table may be different, but what they all have in common is a plan, a roadmap that holds them to account, to timelines and outcomes, and a goal to end homelessness in their community. My motion is about building on that success, building on what works, and rolling it up to a national level. Madam Speaker, when I was visiting with my colleagues, I was pleasantly surprised by the nonpartisan tone to our conversation. Now, that isn't to say I wasn't grilled in a very nice way as to how my motion would make a difference, but the conversations were excellent. I think I can say that the majority of parliamentarians I spoke with realized the need for the federal government to step back into addressing housing and homelessness. And they saw the federal government's National Homelessness Initiative, started in 1999 under a Liberal government, and the subsequently renamed Homelessness Partnering Strategy in 2006 under a Conservative government, as important federal government initiatives that have made a positive difference for communities tackling and addressing homelessness. Many also cited the groundbreaking work of the Mental Health Commission's project At Home Chez Soi as greatly advancing our understanding of housing first and the project's positive impact on those who are homeless, most marginalized, and most vulnerable to great suffering. Madam Speaker, I think parliamentarians can work together better. I believe Canadians expect that and believe that collaboration between parliamentarians is possible and needed if we are to address the defining issues of our time, like the crisis of homelessness. Madam Speaker, I'm presenting a motion on homelessness the week the government released their first ever national housing strategy, and I commend them for that. This is good news. There is still a lot of work to do and much of the detail yet to be determined. It is still somewhat, I feel, a work in progress. For example, the work of reimagining the homelessness partnering strategy is still ongoing, and I believe will be released in the spring of 2018. I would like to make 2 comments on the National Housing Strategy. First, I would like to see a more aggressive goal on homelessness. I'd like to see the government make a commitment to end homelessness. I think all the elements are there within the plan, almost, to do this. And I believe parliamentarians working on a special committee to create a national plan to end and prevent homelessness can do just that. The special committee can connect the dots, build on the work being done by government on HPS, work with experts and communities, and bring us to a plan and a goal to end homelessness. And secondly, I would, and I believe many others would like to have seen the strategy funded at the front end versus backloaded. In other words, have the big investment come early and not so much stretched over many years, and certainly not past the next general election. I point to the example of my own community. You know, the United Way stepped in early with funds to help our community realize sooner rather than later the difference a plan and Housing First could make in addressing homelessness. This allowed other funders and governments to step in after success was demonstrated. I can see the federal government doing a similar strategy. I was glad to see the government identifying data as a key pillar for the strategy. Better data will be key to being able to not only understand the scope and size of the problem we're trying to address, but to also be able to adequately measure progress, hold multiple partners, including provinces and territories, to account for investments. We now estimate that there are a minimum of 235,000 people who will experience homelessness in any given year in Canada. And every night, there are 35,000 homeless people in Canada. Madam Speaker, there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Communities right across Canada, with elected officials of all political stripes, are addressing the issue head-on with local plans to end homelessness. We need to build on this work, and we can. Communities want to see a national plan that they can see themselves being a part of, that delineates exactly how the federal government can be a real and valued partner at their community plan tables. Madam Speaker, my motion, M147, a special committee to create a national plan to end and prevent homelessness, is a way forward in tandem with the National Housing Strategy. I want to see, and I believe Canadians want to see, parliamentarians roll up their sleeves, put partisanship aside, and in partnership with communities, experts, other governments, and those with a lived experience, put the details on a national plan to end and prevent homelessness. Madam Speaker, our goal must be to end homelessness. It is possible and it is probable. Is it possible that communities across Canada and North America have it wrong? Do plans to end homelessness not really work? Is it not possible to end homelessness? Could all these communities be flying in the wrong direction? I don't think so. It's possible. Anything's possible, but it's most likely not probable. When John F. Kennedy said to his fellow Americans, "We will put a man on the moon," he didn't know if it was probable. When he was making that statement, he knew it was possible, and he wanted others to believe in that possibility. So the NASA nerds got to work, and the possible became probable, and of course, ultimately, the reality. Madam Speaker, we have what we need to end homelessness. We have our homelessness equivalent of the NASA nerds. We have the federal government that's giving us an indication that it's possible. And we need a special committee to bring all that together, to build on what is working and to go where we haven't gone before, so to speak. Madam Speaker, we can make the possible probable and end homelessness in Canada. Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Saskatoon West for this really interesting motion. Now that the federal government has announced a national homelessness strategy that's going to implicate many partners, all walks of life, and that will be transformative to the nation, it's important that we make sure that the $40 billion that's been committed to these projects is well spent. I know that within the plan itself, it details $241 million towards research and innovation within housing. But I also believe it's important for this House and us members to consider ways in which we can always continually do better in our housing strategy. When I look at the existing list of standing committees, I see HUMA as being implicated. I, of course, see Public Accounts and Justice as being implicated. I see, obviously, the Status of Women Committee also being implicated because it's important. I asked the member, does she see a unique role, or how does she see a unique role for this committee to play in the context of making sure that we get the housing strategy right? Thank you.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Well, I want to thank my honourable member for that question, and that certainly was part of the conversations I had, Madam Speaker, with parliamentarians about how the best way forward. And the reason I proposed a special committee in particular was because it could really have a focus on a specific government strategy, of which parliamentarians haven't been uniquely involved in. I think the other key piece was that there's a time limit for special committees, and I think what I heard from people is that we're in a crisis and people want to get moving quickly. And I think that structure of a special committee, although it may not be perfect, felt to me and felt to others I talked to a way that we could really focus and do something differently. It also, if you notice, the sort of scope for the committee is to look forward, is to start from here and go somewhere else, as opposed to traditionally committees sort of looking back or evaluating something that the government has done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Madam Speaker. In Nanaimo, in the riding that I serve, the face of homelessness, it has shifted quite a bit over the last 9 months. The workers at Samaritan House, which is a homeless shelter for women only, say that 50% of their clients are now over the age of 50, which really has taken us aback. Those women could be our mothers or our grandmothers. In fact, it could be me. These are women who worked their whole lives in a professional capacity, but because there is very poor tenant protection in legislation in British Columbia, high housing prices and the spillover from Vancouver have hit Nanaimo hard, and people are getting evicted. I would like to ask through you, Madam Speaker, to the member from Saskatoon West, is that a changing demographic that she is also observing, and how might the committee discuss this?
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
I want to thank my honourable colleague and through you, Madam Speaker, sort of affirm what she's describing in her community as really one of the sort of changing faces of homelessness. And although the statistics tell us the overall numbers of people living in shelters has lowered in the last 10 years, the capacity of those shelters is more often at 90%, and those who are using shelters is a different group of people, and it includes people over the age of 50 more than usual. It includes more families. And of course, in many communities, the largest demographic that is using shelters are Indigenous peoples. So this is the kind of thing that a plan can take into account. Communities are dealing with these issues. I think the data and the research will be important so that strategies fit with what the changing face of homelessness is looking like across Canada and within communities.
Resuming debate.